Well, we'll get started as we always do with CCL. We're prompt when we get going here. So welcome to the 2020 Mountain West Regional Conference, Climate Activism in a Changing World. Our region covers the states of Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. Thank you all for being here today. Those of you joining CCL for the first time, volunteers who have participated with CCL for many years, and everyone in between. I am very excited for the 2 half days ahead. For everyone new to CCL, you are here today with a group of dedicated, talented, and tenacious individuals who have been building on our collective successes over the last 12 years. My name is Bill Barron, and I'm your Mountain West Regional Coordinator, and I live in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I've been so since CCL created these roles back in 2013. Personally, I was drawn to CCL not just by the solution we advocate for, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, but also for our approach to this work, and in the end, the extraordinary people who I have met and worked with in CCL. I am grateful to the many people who are involved in putting this conference together. At the conclusion of the day, you will see the entire list, but I would like to take a moment to thank the conference organizers for their hard work. Sean Newell, who led the effort, Natalie Jacobs, Josh Rubik, Drew Faulkner, Don Bayles, David Spence, Buck Sanford, Val Bryant, Connie Bullis, and Charlie McCallie. Thank you. Organizing a regional conference takes a lot of effort, even in the best of circumstances. The planning team seamlessly transitioned from organizing an in-person conference to moving everything virtual. Thank you so much. But before I go into the details of the weekend, we are going to start with a land acknowledgement and virtual visual welcome from CCL Flagstaff, the host chapter, by CCL volunteer Don Bayles.
Good afternoon. I am Don Bayles. I'm a volunteer with CCL Flagstaff, and I want to welcome each of you to this virtual and regional conference. Our home of Flagstaff sits under the shadow of the San Francisco peaks. It rests on a limestone layer of sedimentary rock within the Colorado Plateau. Formally established under US law in approximately 1888 as a city, our town is also in the middle of a really large ponderosa pine forest. Today, Flagstaff represents a crossroads of many cultures, peoples, and thoroughfares. It was not always this way. We know that some 900 years ago, a pre-Columbian people found a way to live within 7 miles of our downtown location. They did this despite the absence of easy water sources. These indigenous forerunners, sometimes referred to as the Sinawa, Spanish for without water, were an inventive, creative, and resilient people. We know they respected the land and found ways to live harmoniously with it.
This is me figuring out.
These early inhabitants didn't know the joys of background noise through technology, but they found a way to live
global warming focused, or
without easy, as mentioned, availability of water.
All the shit I've read a lot. It is not opposed to me. I just don't.
Flagstaff is also a close neighbor of the Navajo Nation, now roughly the geographic size of West Virginia. Before a treaty was reached in 1868, Navajo people were the subject of many harsh practices directed by the US government. Afterwards, they were directed to a reservation. This upset the rhythm of their agricultural, ranching, and religious practices. Navajo life was largely sacrificed for the purpose of 19th and 20th century industrialization by settling Anglo communities such as Flagstaff. Our adjacent mountain remains one of the peaks sacred to the Navajo. Before 1848, the area we now find ourselves in here was actually part of Mexico. The population in northern Arizona, what is now northern Arizona, was fairly sparse. The Mexican-American War resulted in the loss of this region for Mexico, and the area became Arizona territory in the mid-19th century. And it was retained as a territory until our statehood in 1912. Flagstaff is now represented in Washington, D.C. by 2 U.S. senators and a representative from Congressional District Number 1. This district is also home to 12 certified Native nations, including the White Mountain Apache Nation, the Wallapai Nation, the Havasupai Nation, and the Hopi tribe. It's noteworthy that our district includes the Hopi village of Wapai. This village has been inhabited since approximately the year 950, almost 1,100 years. It is among North America's longest continuously inhabited settlements. As some of the photos have shown, this region of the Colorado Plateau is one of extraordinary beauty. It has a landscape pretty much unique to our planet. This geologic area also includes smaller parts of Utah, New Mexico, and Colorado. Those who come to Flagstaff should recognize the importance of this area to those indigenous people who came before us, for whom this land continues to hold deeply valued spiritual, agricultural, and family significance. Thank you.
Thank you, Don, and thanks once again to the Flagstaff team. I'm really excited for our lineup today and tomorrow, and appreciate you taking the time out of your weekend to participate in this virtual conference. Robin's going to put our agenda in the chat, but today we will be together until 4:50 Pacific time and Arizona time, 5:50 Mountain time. Then after a 10-minute break, we will divide into 2 tracks that will run for an hour. Track 1, we invite you to join Creative Climate, Opportunities for Connection. These are youth-created videos that balance information with creative freedom. In track 2, myself, Josh Rubik, and David Spence will be hosting a CCL virtual social. Join us for some fun, share breakthrough experiences, and mingle in breakout rooms as we create an opportunity to get to know each other better. You won't be disappointed. Tomorrow we will begin at the same time, 1 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Mountain Time. We will start with a 30-minute plenary session with Madeline Pera, Vice President of Programs, discussing prepping for the next Congress, contingency planning, and strengthening our hand for 2021. Then after a 10-minute break, we invite you to self-select into 3 different tracks for the rest of Sunday. All tracks will be recorded, so please know that you can access everything from the conference. Recordings of the sessions will be posted on the Regional Conference Presentations page, where you can click on the Mountain West Regional Conference Resources link. Track 1 will offer a climate advocate training. We strongly encourage this training for all new volunteers before lobbying as a CCL member. Track 2 and 3 have a mix of informational sessions and action opportunities. Please see the agenda that Robin's going to post in the chat for all the details. Well, from the pandemic, facing racism issues, and natural disasters, 2020 has brought us many challenges. As we face these challenges, I think of the efforts over the years of many of you and look to CCL's founder, Marshall Saunders, who talked about the constancy of the volunteers, the quality of being enduring and unchanging. And so I ask all of you to stay focused on the climate work you do, building trust, coming from a place of admiration and appreciation and respect for all people, as we always have. For those new to CCL, I welcome you to join this team of amazing people. As a region, we have been influencing the national conversation on climate. Let's build on these successes. Some highlights are, we have 3 senators on the Senate Climate Solutions Caucus: Romney from Utah, Bennett in Colorado, and Rosen from Nevada. At the request of the Utah State Legislature and stemming from the Utah State Climate Resolution, the Utah Roadmap was created to assist with legislative policymaking to improve air quality and address causes and impacts of a changing climate in Utah. It offers 7 actions called mileposts that includes calling for participation in a national dialogue about market-based approaches to reduce carbon emissions. We are seeing great examples of relationship development. and becoming a trusted source of climate-related issues with Representative Curtis and candidate Blake Moore in Utah, as well as in other areas. This has included hikes with liaisons on multiple occasions during these COVID times. We have 115 organizational and 69 individual endorsements for the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act in the region. Laramie has committed to 100% carbon neutrality by 2050. We've had Republican state legislators join us in our lobby teams. We've seen great Republican state legislative outreach in Colorado, and creative ideas such as video testimonials that were sent to a member of Congress's office, and such determination shown as in the Flagstaff team who worked for 2 years to pass a city resolution. All these efforts and many others are having an impact, supplemented by individual actions such as our monthly calling campaign, writing members of Congress, and writing letters to the editor. We have made great strides over the last 12 years. Through the fall and into the spring, let's take it to the next level together through a focus on CCL values, building on our relationships, making CCL a trusted source, and maintaining our positive persistence. It's the people who make CCL what it is, all of us focused on and committed to something bigger than ourselves. And it is CCL's values which make us unique. Robin's going to put those values in the chat for you now. Now more than ever, I ask that we support each other and let our values guide our way in all that we do. We focus on what we see as the single most impactful solution, a national carbon fee and dividend. Optimism. We believe that people are good and democracy works. Relationships. We listen, we work to find common values, and we endeavor to understand our own biases. Integrity. We are prepared and we do our research. We consult experts and use data. Personal power. We use our voices to be heard, transforming us from spectators to engaged citizens. Being nonpartisan. We are open to all who are serious about solving climate change. We work with elected officials and community leaders from across the political spectrum. And diversity. We empower everyone in exercising their personal and political power, regardless of race, ethnicity, nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, ability, socioeconomic factors, or political affiliation. I ask that we strive to be our better selves during this partisan time as we move forward regardless of what comes our way through the election, and create the strongest position possible as we go into the next Congress. We bet the ranch on relationships, and it is the development of these relationships which creates a level of trust that strengthens our ability to persuade our federal delegation. We know that a relationship of trust is necessary for anybody to be convinced of anything. Members of Congress are going to hear it better from someone they trust. That is why it's so advantageous for us to bring business and community leaders who support carbon pricing and the Energy Innovation Act to the attention of our members of Congress. We can either bring people in who are already trusted, or we can develop that trust with the member of Congress we are trying to convince, or preferably a little bit of both. Trust is required, and if someone arrives with that trust or with a step ahead on that trust, they are at an advantage. Building this trust is ongoing and the key to our success. As we know, the urgency to address climate change only becomes more significant and reminds us that we need to stay focused in the coming months. Personally, I'm a mountain biker, and when I'm on the trail and I'm about to encounter a rough stretch, I pick a line, carry momentum, and focus beyond the challenge ahead. I am substantially more successful staying upright if I can do this rather than focusing on what is directly under my wheels. I believe our advocacy can work in the same way. Stay focused while being positive and persistent as we continue to create a strong position for climate advocacy in 2021, regardless of the outcome of the election, to make sure that a carbon fee is included in any climate package and continue to bring attention to this keystone solution. As RBG said, enduring change happens one step at a time. We are making those kinds of steps. We can't control what will happen in our world, but we can choose what we put into the effort. Let's hold a place and envision what it would look like for CCL to be the example of how we can bring our country together to see effective action on climate. Visualize how it's going to feel to succeed and run through this scenario regularly. We will continue to build and carry as much momentum in the coming months, and I invite you to commit to stepping a little farther out of your comfort zone or being willing to take on something extra in the work that we do together as a team for the greater good. I want to leave you with two quotes that I have recently seen. And this first one came from the corner of 1300 East and 17th South, which said, "The only thing stronger than fear is hope." Also, we see with in the Shawshank Redemption, where Andy writes red, he says, "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies." There's nothing wrong with a little hope. So with that, now we will transition to the CCL leadership session with Mark Reynolds, CCL's Executive Director, followed by Dr. Danny Richter, our Legislative Director. I met Mark at CCL's first conference in DC in 2010. Mark also joined me for my first ever lobby meeting that year. So we've been at this for quite a while. At that meeting, I was clearly out of my comfort zone, while at the same time realizing how important it is for citizens like me to engage in the political process. That moment changed my life. Mark, I appreciate you being a part of that, and welcome to the Mountain West Regional Conference.
Thank you so much, Bill. It is so great to see you, and I'm so happy that I'm here with all of you. When Bill said CCL is made up, the people is what makes the organization, and nobody more important in this organization than Bill Barron. I also want to just add my thanks to the conference planning team. You might think that a virtual conference is much simpler than a real, live conference, but it's at least as stressful. Having been part of our virtual Earth Day and our virtual June conference, in addition to just the usual stresses you have of organizing a conference, you think this is gonna be the day Zoom dies, you're worried that people aren't gonna get their connection, that things are gonna freeze. So I really want to add my thanks to the conference planning team. I'm so happy that I can be here today because I've been part of the last 4 regional conferences. I was there in February of 2015 in Golden at the Unitarian Church, for those of you who remember there. The next year in Salt Lake City, we were with the Episcopal Church, which particularly was memorable for me because I grew up in Salt Lake. And 2 of my best friends in high school and college, their father was the Episcopalian bishop for the state of Utah, so it was actually a building that I'd spent a fair amount of time in. In 2017, in the Northern Mountain Visitor Center outside of Phoenix. And then last year at the University of Colorado Boulder. And for those of you who are there, you probably remember the incredible job that Kelsey did of moderating a panel. We had a young conservative and a young liberal who talked about and actually demonstrated what they had in common with each other. And I remember one of them was in a suit and tie, and one of them was in a cowboy hat and a beard and a hat. I just don't remember which one was the conservative and which one was the liberal, but it was really great to be there, and I'm happy that I can be with you today. I particularly am really looking forward to when we get together again, and that will happen. It's meaningful for me to see people. And if you put people in the I like to hug people, I don't like to hug people category, I'm in the I like to hug people. If you are a hugger, it's important that you quickly find out who the non-huggers are, because don't bother them. They don't want to be touched, don't go near them. But so we're going to set up a new protocol to make it easy when we have future conferences. We're going to make a new kind of name tag. One name tag is going to say tree hugger only. And so we know we're not supposed to hug you because it says tree hugger only. And then the other kind of name tag will say tree hugger and people hugger. And then that means you can go into my line and we'll take your temperature and we'll have you sign a little form that says that the person you're about to hug doesn't have COVID. He may have 2 or 3 other things that'll kill you, but it's not COVID. And then we'll go through that whole process and we'll start the conference. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm not going to get into in great detail kind of our plan for the rest of this year and our way forward next year, because Danny and Madeline are here. Danny's going to talk today. Madeline's going to talk tomorrow. And so I don't want to reiterate some of the things that they're already going to cover. But I do want to point out that this is a really big deal for us. Both of our organization's vice presidents are here. Our vice president of programs, Madeline Para, who'll be speaking tomorrow, and our vice president of government affairs, Danny Richter, who'll be speaking as soon as I'm done in a couple minutes here. Over the next 40 days, I expect things to get even nastier. Presidential campaign years are brutal. And this particular presidential campaign is probably going to be even tougher because it's this particular year. And it's going to be rough. And we're going to have to get to 40 days from now, see how the dust settles. And you'll be hearing from Madeline about, we have been working on different planned responses, but I expect it to be hard. I expect it to be hard on you and I. I saw a tweet from a woman on Friday who said, at this point in things, if you're being kind to your loved ones and showing up to work, you get an A+. I think there is something to be said for that. You know, it's going to be hard, it's going to be challenging, and we're just going to have to try and be as good as we can in the face of all that. I want to share one other thing with you also, because I think that there's something that we uniquely work on that I don't think anybody else in the climate space is necessarily working on, but I think it's important for us to remember. So bear with me for just 1 second. I'm going to share my screen and, oops, move this down here, get this. Okay, sorry, I just got to move one more thing. Okay, so this is something that we found from an organization called Our Common Purpose, and the paper is called Reinventing American Democracy for the 21st Century by Danielle Allen, Stephen B. Heinz, and Eric Liu. They say the opportunity to participate fully in our constitutional democracy is, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., the chance to complete ourselves. Our best hope for human fulfillment lies in supporting and nurturing the political system that has been bequeathed to us, our constitutional democracy. Yet our ties to one another are fragile. The very institutions that should be the instrument of our freedom and the source of our protection appear to fail us. We do not trust them. We do not trust one another. In fear for and anxiety about our own prospects, we turn on one another. We starve our constitutional democracy of the nourishment it needs, closing our hearts to our fellow citizens. Why should we give our energies to one another again? Not to rebuild the public as we knew it, not to restore a golden age. Our public sphere is full of disagreement, in great measure because voices formerly excluded are now in the debate. The clamor and clash of our contests are in this sense a victory. We've made ourselves a bigger people, a more capacious and sometimes contradictory people, and therefore also a more resourceful people. The question now is whether we can find our way to accommodations with one another so that we can birth for ourselves a sense of shared fate. To develop accommodation with one another, we need functional institutions for our joint decision-making. We can pick up this work now together, but at the same time, we must also kindle a spirit of mutual responsibility in civic life, a humility that rehumanizes us. Our institutions and our norms will thrive only if we remember that democracy, when it works, is not a battle whose purpose is annihilation of the enemy. It is, if it works, a game of infinite repeat play that includes ever more participants. We must therefore remember how to work together, even with those we might want to demonize or ignore, if we are to achieve the reinvention called for here. We have no time to waste. Our constitutional democracy is only as strong and resilient as our belief in it. For love of freedom and equality, for love of country, for love of one another, and out of hope for a better future, we need to reclaim our bond. If we turn back to one another, we can transform our institutions. We can renovate our Constitution. we can elevate our culture, we can at last achieve a true democracy. So I wanted to share that with you because I think we play a key role in that. Yes, I know we're a one-issue organization, and that is about getting the climate right. But our method of doing that is through democracy. And I just think it's important, may not be very obvious for the next 40 days, but we have a key role in making sure that democracy works the way that it should. Again, thank you so much for including me. I hope you continue every year. It's been a nice 5-year run of being part of your conference. I hope that continues to happen in the future. I'd love to stay on for the rest of the day, but we're filming a new segment for the far middle. And I blew it so bad yesterday that making me redo it today. So thank you all for letting me be part of the conference. Bill, thanks. I'll turn it back. Actually, Dr. Danny Richter should be joining us now. Thank you all so much.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be with you. Thank you, Mark, for that introduction. It's good to be with all of you here again. I have some things to say, so I'm going to go ahead and say them. I'll be talking for about 15 minutes, and then the rest of this time will be for Q&A. So what I'd like to talk about is that each of our last 2 action sheets has included an action focusing on endorsers, and specifically on existing endorsers. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to provide a broader context for our strategy of action this fall. I'd like to zero in on the need for buzz and clout. Then I'm going to go into a more specific context. Why go after existing endorsers and why do it now? Then I'll provide some specific thoughts on approaching those endorsers, and then I'll wrap it all up with some conclusions. So first of all, let's start with that broader context. There's a growing sense right now that a big climate package will be forthcoming early next year. This is easiest to imagine in the scenario where Biden wins and Democrats take the Senate, but because no one is predicting that Democrats lose the House, it is a possibility regardless of who holds the White House or the Senate. Now, what I mean by a package bundles several pre-existing standalone bills together. So it would include many climate policies and may or may not include carbon pricing as one of them. Many volunteers have noted this and some have concerns. And so here are my twin goals. Number 1, I want a carbon price to be the backbone of any climate package. And number 2, I want to make sure that CCL has a seat at the table when that package is being discussed. What I mean by that is that we are consulted about what should be in that package, and that the architects of that package are willing to make changes to ensure that we can recommend to you, our volunteers, that you support that package. So I want them to listen to us. Now, I started with concern, but there is an argument that we might be okay, that we might meet both of these goals without much further effort. And key to that argument is that there's just no getting around the Senate. Even if you have Democrats take the Senate, and even if you get rid of the filibuster, which is being discussed, the legislation is going to be more durable with Republicans on board, and you aren't going to be able to count on several Democratic senators voting for certain types of climate action. Further, though the Biden plan that he's put online does not include any mention of a carbon price, the language of his climate plan does appear to leave the door open for such a policy, and his early messaging did talk about a carbon price, and there are media reports that Chris Coons, who after all holds Vice President Biden's old Senate seat from Delaware, is a close advisor. So we could be okay, but it's not the role of advocates to assume they're going to be okay, or to take things for granted, or to rest on their laurels. It is the role of advocates to tilt the scales of history in their favor. So how do we tilt the scales of history in our favor? How do we ensure that CCL has a seat at that table when discussing that package of bills? And how do we ensure that the kind of policy that the IPCC 1.5 degree report called a, quote, necessary condition of ambitious climate policy, end quote, is at the heart of it? Well, this is where buzz and clout come in. I'll start with buzz. Essentially, we need people talking about a carbon price. We need important people talking about it, and we need regular people talking about it. If it's possible to believe that the necessary condition for ambitious climate policy might be left out of the climate package, and I want to make clear, by Democrats, then we need to remind everyone how much support this necessary condition already has. That's the fundamental logic explaining why the actions for the past 2 months have focused on efforts to get endorsers. I think also key to this is building our clout and sharing that clout. As we seek to get more discussion about this necessary condition, and as we seek a seat at the table for CCL so we can directly remind lawmakers how much support this policy has among experts, we should share the success we've been having over the past few months to help build our clout. Remember, this was a stated goal of including the supporting ask we did before our June lobby day. And the way things have developed, I think we've shown that we can get things done on the Hill. But that will only translate into that seat at the table if people know about it. So as you reach out back out to endorsers you've already had success with, I think you should also share the success. People love a winner. So feel free to share that in the 2 months after our June lobby day, the Reclaim Act and the BEST Act were passed as part of the infrastructure package in the House, that was HR 2. The Use It Act was included in the National Defense Authorization Act in the Senate. We've had 69 new co-sponsors on the bills we supported, 69. Referring back to the notes of that you all submitted, we know that for 61% of those co-sponsors, CCL volunteers brought up the bill they co-sponsored in their meeting. This is amazing. This is truly amazing to be able to tie for those 69 co-sponsors to 61% of our meetings with them, mentioning that bill that they co-sponsored. That's pretty exceptional. Of course, we can't say for sure that they joined because CCL volunteers asked them to. Correlation still is not causation, but it is suggestive. I also want to give a further anecdote. 2 months ago, on only the second liaison's call of the day, those liaisons on the call know that Amy Bennett has 2 liaisons calls every other Monday. Amy shared with the liaisons that the Foster Office is the lead sponsor of the BEST Act, was putting together a Dear Colleague letter to get a last surge of co-sponsors for that act, the BEST Act, before it was no longer able to add co-sponsors. And in 1 week, that bill added 24 co-sponsors. And again, correlation isn't causation, but if you count the co-sponsors on this bill where we know a CCL liaison reached out to them, then our overall percentage of CCL requests preceding actual co-sponsorship jumps to 73% for those 69 co-sponsors. That is bonkers. So what could help us put a carbon price as the backbone of any climate package more than anything else, of course, would be getting Republican co-sponsors on the bill. Now, endorsements and statements of support will very much help with helping to get Republicans on this bill. And I just want to make clear, it's not because we haven't been trying. I mean, those of you who work in Republican districts, you know, it's not because you haven't been trying and haven't been creative in trying to get Republicans. We need something a little bit more. And I think that little bit more could be endorsers. So let's talk a little bit more about the specific context. Why going after existing endorsers and why now? Now, I already mentioned that carbon pricing, the necessary component, is in need of some more buzz to remind elected officials of how impactful scientists and economists say these types of policies are. And of course, you are the ones who got these endorsements and resolutions in the first place. Without you, they probably never would have happened because so often in our democracy, inaction is the default. Not on this call, but outside of this call. And so to get Republicans and to generate buzz, we need people talking about this policy. It's probably easier to get people who have already endorsed to talk about this again. And so that's why we're focusing on endorsers so much. We want them talking about this to help us with our buzz. And so some general thoughts about endorsements. Just as we practice laser talks so that they're at the tips of our tongue, and we work on putting them into our own words, we want to try and get endorsers to do that as well. I also want to recognize that it takes time. Doing this is like building muscles or building endurance. You can't do it all at once, no matter how much you try. It does take time. It is also not the case that if an endorser speaks out about their support once, they will stop speaking out about it. It may be the case that, like so many of us on this call, they like speaking about it. Asking them to speak about it again will get them into the habit. And so maybe they bring it up every time they speak. Like all good habits, it takes time to form, and we need to start that now. We also want more people speaking out about it. And by definition, The way we found these endorsers in the first place is they're already influential people. And if we want more people to talk about it, we need people to start talking about it. It's easier to get the next endorser if the last endorser is still talking about it and talking about it regularly. And then, of course, what is so key in all of this is sharing. We want to share success. As we get successes, just as we share letters to the editor with the members of Congress, let's share that success. And so for the December Lobby Day, we want to share a summary of our success, an impressive display of all our successes. And December is when we stack the deck and get off to a running start in the new Congress. And this is all part of tilting the scales of history in our favor. So now, those are some general thoughts. Let's get a little bit more specific. How do we get endorsers to work their muscles? Well, let's try and get them to do this in any way we can possibly think of. Here's some specific suggestions. Maybe they could write about it on their Twitter feed, their Facebook page, any of their social media accounts. Maybe they'd be willing to record a video of themselves repeating their endorsement and posting that on their social media outlets. Maybe they'd be willing to write an op-ed reiterating their support. It's fine if they talk about many of the climate policies they support. They don't have to talk about just our preferred solution, but this should be one of them. Maybe they'd be willing to write a joint op-ed with you. Of course, they can always write letters to the editor. Of course, the next time they're in touch with your federal member of Congress, maybe they'd be willing to mention their support on this policy to them. Maybe you could see if they'd be interested in attending a meeting with you to talk about their support, maybe in December. And we always trying to teach good habits and asking open-ended questions. As you reach out to endorsers, ask them an open-ended question about how they might consider expressing their support. They may have some ideas that surprise you, but that seem easy to them. So be sure to ask them, how might you express your support about this? What options come to your mind? As you start these conversations with them, some other things that you can consider including. You can consider including that quote from the IPCC about carbon pricing being necessary. And here's that quote. Explicit carbon prices remain a necessary condition of ambitious climate policies, and some authors highlight the potential benefit brought by coordination among groups of countries. And if you want to find it for yourself, that comes in the IPCC Special Report on a 1.5 degree world. And I like to frame this, going back to our values that we started this conference with, I like to frame this as CCL being an organization that trusts experts. We're the people who were convinced by scientists who said that climate was a problem, and we were convinced by the economists who said that a carbon fee or tax is the simplest, quickest way to get the most emissions reductions at the lowest cost. They're still saying that, and we're still listening to them. Another thing to consider bringing to the conversation as you go back to endorsers is the importance of durability. Perhaps the only thing worse than a climate policy that doesn't pass is a climate policy that passes and then is repealed when the other party has power. The key to avoiding this is passing a bipartisan piece of legislation, especially as US courts add justices likely to be more hostile to regulatory approaches by the federal government. I also suggest consider bringing information about other endorsements. As humans, it's often more comfortable for us to speak out if you know you already have company. It's true of endorsers as well. And also talk about our recent successes. Everybody loves a winner after all, so talk about those wins I talked about earlier. And remember as well, we have a deadline. We want to be able to impress federal legislators at our December lobby day to get a head start in the new Congress. It may help to share that this meeting and this request is part of a nationwide effort with a specific date for delivering a message of support to the people who can do the most for the climate and the world, members of Congress. Many people respond well to a deadline, and they like feeling part of a larger effort and strategy. Again, maybe they'll even want to join you for your meeting. So wrapping it all up, and then we'll get to questions. It seems increasingly likely that a climate package that might actually pass is forthcoming. And CCL has two goals with respect to that package. Number one, that it includes a carbon price as its backbone. And number two, that we are consulted and listened to as it is being crafted. To achieve both of these goals, we have been and continue to push to get endorsers to talk about their support for a carbon fee. We're starting with existing endorsers, but we're welcoming new ones too. Come on board. To achieve our goals, we need buzz, and the thing that could help us achieve our goals more than anything would be Republican support for HR 763. This push for vocal endorsers makes both outcomes more likely. And as we approach existing endorsers, remember that they might actually like talking about their support for this policy. Any way they can think of to express their support is welcome, and you can get to that by including some open-ended questions about what might be easy for them. And in your conversations with them, consider also mentioning that IPCC quote that I talked about: political durability, existing endorsements so they feel they're part of something, CCL's recent successes, and that December 8th deadline, and that this is a national effort with a coherent strategy to influence people who can actually make this happen. So those are my remarks, and I'm happy to take questions.
Hi, Danny. We've had a few people ask already if you could provide the link to the IPCC quote that you're referring to.
I can certainly provide. I can paste the quote in the chat, and then the link I can provide later. But I might wait until after I'm done, so I'm not just searching through the internet while I'm trying to answer your questions. So here's the quote. And then after I'm done speaking, I'll be happy to find the link.
Great, thank you. Another question, what is the most effective endorsements to seek?
You know, it really depends on your member. Every member is different. And this is why I'm so glad that we have all of you. I often say that CCL's most valuable resource is our volunteers. I take a very general view of politics, and I rely on you to know who matters in your district, who matters in your state, who matters to your member of Congress, who are the people they listen to, who are the people they talk to. Go on to opensecrets.org. Who are the people who are donating to their campaigns? It's going to be different for every person. We have to remember that each member of Congress is a person, and they have a unique story, they have a unique background, and they're in Congress for different reasons. So every member of Congress will be different. Pay attention to their statements, to who they talk about in their speeches, and that'll probably give you some hints for who they might be interested in hearing from.
This person is asking, is there a good source of data regarding employment in carbon-based industries versus renewables, especially changes over time, and specifically because they live in Montana and they like enough detail to share with local endorsers?
Yeah, I would start with our laser talk on jobs. It was updated as of April, so that one I know exactly where to go to. I have that saved, so I will paste that in the chat. But that has the most recent data available. I don't know about changing through time. Their jobs can be kind of difficult to track. So the federal government was tracking green jobs for a while, and that made it easier to disaggregate it, but they stopped a few years ago. And so it's been harder to disaggregate what jobs they're kind of grouped into a larger sector. So the job story actually is a tough one to tell because of the data availability. So that laser talk updated in April, that's our best crack at it. I would start there. Maybe you can go deeper, but there is a resolution problem on jobs and those related to those data.
Next question, what kind of shifts have you seen with Republicans and their concerns over climate over time?
Yeah, well, I was just telling this to Mark yesterday. I'm almost done with the June analysis from June, and one of the topics that I track is skeptic. You know, how many times does a member of Congress make a skeptical statement about the climate science? And this year there was only one. There's one office out of 437 offices had a skeptical statement. And I think that last year the number was 7, and that's down from significantly more when I started tracking this in 2014. So based on those data, the data that our volunteers are having, there are a lot fewer skeptical statements. And when I look at the direction of leadership of the Republican Party, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are very leadership driven these days. That's one of the aspects of modern American politics is the leadership really drives the conversation and negotiating. And so for the Republican leadership on January 16th of this year to hold a caucus-wide, that's all the Republican caucus in the House, for them to have a meeting specifically on climate, that sends a very strong signal from the leadership that it's okay to be a Republican and try to solve climate change. And in fact, we want to see Republican conservative solutions to climate change because we need this for the future of our party. That just didn't exist prior to this. There was always this thought that if you're a Republican, maybe the leadership would have consequences. Part of the reason both Democrats and Republicans are so leadership driven right now is because there are real consequences, negative incentives if you step out of line. And now that Republican leadership in the House has said, no, this is a priority, that's a very different conversation. It was, of course, only a couple months later that the whole nation locked down and really focused on COVID. So this didn't really have that much time to percolate. But I think that is still true, that there's been this leadership driven statement. Republicans need to figure out climate change if we want to be able to continue to win elections. And we also saw that in the notes. We saw Republicans, rank and file Republicans, bringing up that meeting. So this is something that even in June was still part of the what rank and file Republicans were thinking of. So I think that that's extremely significant.
Great, thank you. And we only have a couple minutes left, so this will be the last question. How has COVID affected the climate conversation?
I think the biggest impact is probably as it relates to co-benefits, co-pollutants. So the interface with burning fossil fuels and all the pollutants, and particularly as it interfaces with environmental justice, and how when you have these when you burn fossil fuels, you produce PM 2.5, you produce NOx, you produce SOx, and how a lot of those emissions are concentrated in frontline communities and they disproportionately affect people of color. And when you throw in a respiratory disease like COVID on top of that, they have much, much worse outcomes. And so I think that those two conversations are very much linked. And I think that as you get climate legislation, a climate package coming forward, I think that those two topics are very much going to be linked in the minds of legislators. So I think that that's probably the biggest shift in the climate conversation in American politics.
Well, Danny, thank you so much for taking the time out of your afternoon to be with us today, and really appreciate all that you're doing in DC, and we're really excited for what's coming up for the rest of the conference. You're welcome to join if you want, but I know you probably have some kids that demand your attention. So
I think I'm going to relieve my wife. She's been keeping them relatively quiet for the past hour or so. So I think it's my turn. But it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thanks so much, Danny.